My name is Lauren Peterson, and I started in '75, fall of '75, and I was a chief model maker. Worked on all 6 films, and retired a little while ago. So my story is that I was one of the 3 of us that went to Guatemala. I'm in the person in the scene, you know, as the Millennium Falcon takes off, and I think Yavin, and you know, I'm doing this kind of stuff. And we were out in the middle of the jungle. We actually got to stay in these little palapas in Guatemala, out in Tikal. And you know, we were a little film crew of 3 people from ILM, and there was a guy named Pepe Lenzi, who was a front man from one of the studios from Fox. And I'd never met him before, but he could speak 5 languages. He looked like Marcello Mastroianni, gray at the temples, when we were all, you know, 30 years old or something. We were kind of Volkswagen camper people, and he was more like knowing Humphrey Bogart or you know, Gregory Peck, that kind of a guy. Anyway, every night we had dinner. It was always black beans and chicken and gallo beer. Black beans, chicken, gallo beer, and the little palapa. That's all it was. And the lights always went out. There was no electricity after 9 o'clock out in the jungle. So the first night we have chicken, beans, beer, and a little piece of cake. I'd say about 1.25 inches by about 1.5 inches thick, and a little, no icing. That was it. That was dessert with coffee. And Pepe Lenzi, being an older guy who had worked with big names like Ava Gardner and all that stuff, he calls over the waitress, and he says, you know, Hollywood, we're big, blah, 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 blah. He was Italian, you know, we're making a major movie here, and we're bringing money into Tikal, and the dessert, we could have a little bit more dessert than that. You know, he said it very nicely. So the next night, we got a piece that was about 4 inches by 4 inches by 1.5 inches thick. And we're, you know, having our cake and our tea at the end of the day. And a young woman in her 20s comes over and says, from now on, I'll be sitting with you guys for dinner. And we said, oh, great, you know, didn't even think exactly why right away. And she said, you know why? Because look, nobody got any cake tonight, and you guys got all the cake. And they only had one cake pan that was 9 inches by 9 inches, and the woman however many people were in the palapa, she would cut the cake, you know, like 6 pieces or 8 pieces or 12 pieces. So since we complained, and since we were big people from Hollywood, we got all the cake. And everybody else was kind of looking at us, you know. And so we had to call, Pepe Lenzi called her back again and said, you know, go back to the old system, you know, that we'd all, whatever size cake we got, that was what we got. But that was one of the millions of stories in the years from 1975 to now. There's many, many more. But that was a good one, a good funny one.
I'm Ben Burt, and I was involved making sound effects for Star Wars. And a crew, obviously, helped me and added to it, made it better. I remember the time on the first Star Wars movie when we showed the movie to ourselves the first time. It was a private screening up at George's house. The only people that attended were the editing crew and me and George and Marsha Lucas. There were probably 8 people in the room. And the film had been put together, just enough of it so that we could see almost the whole story. There were no special effects in it. There were title cards or slugs where there was supposed to be an effect shot, or there was a scene cut in from an old airplane aviation war movie, you know, dogfights or something. And there was, it was very sketchy. And I had done a temp mix, you know, added some music, some sound effects, but most of it was just the raw sound of what was on the set. And we were a little afraid, what are we gonna see? Because no one person had seen the whole film yet together. Editors, there were 3 editors plus George cutting, working separately and separate reels. And so here they were attached together for the first time. And I sat in the back row watching it. And as it went along, I realized this is really something special. When we got to the scene in the trash masher, where it gets very tense, the walls are closing, and then finally it breaks open and they get out, I actually started crying. I was probably tired, but I was in the back row so nobody could see me. I was like, this is really a great film. I'm just so excited because it just resonated in so many ways, and it's great that you could kind of see that coming. And it was great that it worked even in its raw state, which meant that the core, dramatic values of the film, the characters, the dialogue, their performances, the way it was being edited was really functioning well. So it was very exciting. And from that point on, even though there was a struggle to get to the completed movie, I remembered that moment, that fresh moment, seeing it for the first time, which just was incredibly exciting. I'll never forget that thrill. It was the magic of movies, and there it was, and we were part of it.
My name is Rose Degnan, and I was the production assistant on Star Wars. I grew to become the production supervisor by Jedi and director of marketing for many years after that. My favorite / most hated memory is John Dykstra was nominated for Academy Award for Visual Effects on Star Wars. His girlfriend, Cass McCune, broke up with him about a week before, so he asked me to attend the Academy Awards. It was my birthday. It was my 25th birthday. I'm at the hairdresser, getting beautiful. I'd bought a gown, I was having my makeup and hair done, and I get a call from Cass McCune saying, we made up. I'm going to the Academy Awards. I went anyway, fully dressed up, full makeup, full hair, and I was in the crowd outside, and as they arrived on the red carpet, I screamed, John Dykstra, you son of a bitch! And the security comes and grabs my arms and walks me off. I talked him out of arresting me because it was my birthday. So that's my little piece, my little secret memory that nobody knows. My legacy, the thing I am most proud of having contributed to LucasFilm and Industrial Light and Magic is I started the daycare center. I was pregnant. I had a 3-year-old and a 4-year-old, and I walk up to the front of a company meeting and I say to everybody, I want to have your babies. We need a daycare center. And the company backed me. We had a daycare center. Mine were the only 2 children in it for about a week. It has been sold out ever since then. If your children are happy, you will not leave your job, no matter what people offer you for money. So thank you, Lucasfilm, for seeing that, realizing that, and allowing us workers to have a balanced life.
Biggest mistake I ever made in my life was hiring this guy on Return of the Jedi.
What's your name?
Oh yeah, my name is Phil Tippett,
Not
and
that famous.
I worked. I wore a whole bunch of different hats working on the first 3 Star Wars movies. This is Kirk Thatcher.
Manly doing. Yes, thank you. Wow, I was introduced by Phil Tippett. He did all the he did the chess set. I'll do your resume. He did the chess set on.
Now, what do you do?
Star Wars. I did creatures on Jedi. I was in the creature crew that poor Phil was gifted with.
So Kirk got out of high school, and this was the first gig he got not living at home.
Yeah.
And your dad was like a lawyer or something
and
like
a Republican.
That? Yeah, and he was like 8 feet tall, and he wore like suits.
You said he looked like Ronald Reagan. I said, yeah.
Yeah, only
bigger,
really tall. And Kirk got himself, drank whiskey every night and stayed up really late and got himself like really sick.
Soaked in urethane.
So his dad had to come up and
revive me
and do a tour of the studio. And he was like, went in the mold room and went like, I understand that this urethane foam that you use off-gases cyanide. Isn't that what they use to execute prisoners?
Jews! They used to kill Jews in World War II. You're like,
and it was like, oh, fuck. Oh, God. Now I'm doomed. And anyway, and then I asked Kirk to do shit like, could you organize these boxes? And like, so Kirk would like organize the boxes and said, I've done the job. You want to see what I've done? And I'm like, yeah, okay. And I look, and there's like all these boxes and all these shelves, and each one is labeled miscellaneous junk. So that's
comedy.
That's what I had to deal with.
Comedy.
These were people I worked with.
Phil, and then it got worse when we were in Yuma doing the Sarlacc pit, and we were working with barge cement, where the fumes are incredibly toxic, and we're in basically a solar oven, a white parabola made of foam rubber, gluing latex skins on this thing. And so we're all just getting goofy high off barge cement, what do they call VOCs, volatile organic compounds. And Phil was on the top of the ladder, and we're using, remember, big hat pins to glue, to stick the latex in. And I was getting incredibly goofy from the heat and the fumes. And so Phil's butt was right above me, and Randy Dutra's looking at me, and I have this big hat pin. I go,
yeah, I forgot about that.
yeah, and I stabbed you right in the butt, and you came down. I thought it would be hilarious, because I watched Three Stooges movie. Well, you came down the ladder basically on top of me, and was just furious, which you had every right to be. And I'm amazed you didn't fire me that time. I'm amazed a number of times, but that was the one day I thought I screwed up. But I was drinking, like you said, a shot of tequila every morning, because one of the cowboy drivers was like, you know how you wake up, you do a shot of tequila, it wakes you right up. So I'm like, okay, I don't know shit.
The only reason you survived was that I needed you.
Oh, Phil. And there you go.
All right.
2 years of that.
My name's John Berg. I did a combination of things, part cantina, some stop motion, and this and that, and sundry. First thing I'd like to just mention is what an amazing experience it is to be here 40 years after Star Wars was released and see so many of the people that are just part of an incredible good fortune I've had. Artists, technicians, craftsmen, the top of the line. And one of the things in looking around at all these wonderful faces, these are really nice people. They're thoughtful, they're kind, and really smart. And that's been a real treasure in my life to be part of something like that. And I'm really eternally grateful for it. One of the things that when I came up and worked on Empire, I had a really great chance to get a fine appreciation for the grip department. And I think I had a really good opportunity to see what these guys could do. I remember I had a great big 4-foot walker. We were to shoot it with high speed of the big collapse when the rebels down it. And we designed an elaborate system of ratchets and springs and all kinds of stuff to get it to work. And it was a big dud. And I ran out of ideas. And it was Ted Minke and his wonderful crew that figured out how to get that great, spectacular shot. And he did it with springs and wires and a piece of bungee cord and incredible ingenuity. And that's just typical of every department I worked with here. And it was a wonderful experience.
My name is John Dykstra, and I was the visual effects supervisor on the first Star Wars. Rose asked me for a story about the work that we were doing on the first show, so I thought I'd talk about the death of the refrigerator. There was a refrigerator that we used to keep our lunches and cold drinks cold in the facility. And that refrigerator, with age, eventually succumbed and ceased to work. I chose to dispatch the refrigerator in a relatively extreme way. So I took the forklift and penetrated the refrigerator, took the refrigerator on the tines of the forklift outside where a rope was tied to it. We lifted it high in the air, and then we pulled the refrigerator, or began to pull the refrigerator off the tines of the forklift. And again, as timing would have it, this was exactly when the executives showed up to see how work was going at the facility. So it was not an auspicious occasion, but it was sort of indicative of the sense of camaraderie that the crew who did the first Star Wars had, and subsequent Star Wars as well, I'm sure. But it was really critical that we all felt as though we were in it together, and some of that stuff was part of doing that.
I'm Richard Edlund, and I was the visual effects supervisor on Empire and Jedi, and also the first cameraman or director of photography on Star Wars for the miniatures. That was the best phone call I ever got. I mean, I got a call from John Dykstra to come out and visit him and Gary Kurtz. And I'd been shooting at Abel's, Bob Abel's studio, and basically had been done a lot of commercials, but I had other experience going back in the 60s. But anyway, we had a meeting and hit it off pretty well. And I got hired after 20 minutes. The pay was going to be $600 a week, and I was making, at the time, I was making $350 at Abel's. But I gave Abel a couple of months' notice, and by the time I left, I was making $750. So Abel kept giving me these massive raises trying to buy me. But the idea of, doing a feature and doing visual effects for a feature was attractive to me, and I was worried about Star Wars because trust in the Force, Luke, was a who's going to make that line play, Brando? I mean, it needed somebody with gravitas to make that play, and I didn't know that kind of a budget was available for Star Wars because it seemed kind of like a teenage movie at that moment. I was at a few months later, I guess it was a couple months later, when we were already into it, and I was at the coffee machine and I heard Jim Nelson announce over the PA that Alec Guinness had been cast for Obi-Wan Kenobi. And at that moment, I knew Jaws was in trouble. The shark was in trouble because Obi-Wan Kenobi, Alec Guinness transcended the demographic that I was thinking that the movie was going to be playing to. And at that moment, I felt that it was going to be a blockbuster, and I had complete faith that it was going to be, and it was. So there's a couple other important decisions that led to the success of Star Wars. The first one probably was Ralph McQuarrie, and him doing a number of paintings, which actually art directed the whole series. The paintings that Ralph did set the look of Star Wars, and also helped George sell the property. I mean, Universal turned it down to their everlasting shame, but Laddie said that he would get behind it, even though when Fox printed out their movies to come for the next year. The first was, I think it was The Other Side of Midnight or Julia, and it was like 2-page, it was a chrome coat cover and, thick paper and everything, and Star Wars was like the number 7 movie, and it was a picture of Luke Skywalker. One of the most important decisions that was made was by Gary and Gary Kurtz to entrust John and I and a few other people with the job of producing 365 visual effects shots, blue screen shots, which had never been done before. Our team as a visual effects team was one of the tipping points for Star Wars. I mean, and you have to add Johnny Williams' music to that, and Ben Burtt's sound. These are things that brought the movie alive, and the thing is that in visual effects, we all go to mute dailies. We don't have any sound. We have a noisy projector in the room, and everybody's talking, and we're watching a daily, and everybody's picking it apart. So let's say that we should fix that. We should fix that. Well, when I went to the Chinese theater and I saw the Star Destroyer come overhead and John Williams' throbbing music behind it. I mean, it was like, I always felt that that was the most important shot in the movie, because if we didn't get the audience by the throat with that shot, we were in really serious trouble. So I thought that that was a really important shot. And the thing is that George had wanted to build this huge model on the wall of the stage, and I was trying to be, politically correct about this, and say, well, George, but we only have a 40-foot track, and so the shot that you're talking about is not going to be possible. And the model shop had built the Star Destroyer, which was about less than 4 feet long. It was about three feet long, a little over 3 feet long, and it was only finished on one side. And the concept, because there was a lot of nurnies and stuff, finished in. And if it had to go from right to left, we'd shoot it straight. And if it had to go from left to right, we'd shoot it straight and then flop it. So but the bottom was fairly well configured. And so Grant had his best people finish the bottom and trick it out as much as possible. And I shot with a 24mm lens, scraping the bottom of the model. It was like a 1/16 of an inch off the model. And we were amazed by it, when we saw it in dailies the next day. And I did about, I think I did 3 or 4 takes of that before I was satisfied with it, because that was considered by me to be the most important shot that we were going to do. And then to cut now to the premiere at the Chinese theater, when all of a sudden you hear the Ben Burtt's lasers and Johnny Williams' music. The importance of that shot showed in that, and everybody is still awed by that shot.
Howard Kazanjian, I was the producer on Return of the Jedi, also another George Lucas film, Raiders of the Lost Ark. Favorite memory? There are so many, but let me tell you about one. Tonight there was a C-3PO and an R2-D2 at this event, and C-3PO, I'm told, was in his costume without taking it off for 45 minutes. Well, Tony Daniels, who played C-3PO in all the films, between each take, he'd complain and take off part of his costume. Then it would take 15, 20 minutes to put it back on. And here we are, just between takes, waiting. Is it a favorite memory? It's a memory. God bless you, Tony. I love you. I can tell you that I love working with the ILM guys in George Lucas's miscellaneous films. But when I left Lucasfilm and went back to Hollywood, the executives down there said, how can you possibly do smaller films? You've just finished, Raiders of the Lost Ark cost $20 million. And back then, that was a decent sized budget. And of course, Empire was high in the 30s, and Return of the Jedi was just under 40. And that was a lot of money those days, but nobody else could have produced pictures like that for that little amount of money. But my challenge was to convince the executives that I was now trying to set movies in motion back down in Hollywood, that I could produce smaller budgets. And that was a deterrent, having worked at Lucasfilm. But I loved every minute of it.
My name is Jim Bloom. I was an associate producer on The Empire Strikes Back and a co-producer on Return of the Jedi. The story I'd like to share is that one day I was lucky enough to be sitting on a stage, and alongside me were Dennis Muren and Phil Tippett and Ben Burtt and a few other people from The Empire and from Jedi. Somebody asked a question about what made the movie so special, and I sort of interrupted the rest of them to say the thing that made these movies so special was being able to work with guys like this, to be able to hire some of the best and the brightest and the most creative and let them do their job and make the contributions that made all the movies so special. And it was really a remarkable experience for me.
My name is Marsha Lucas.
And I'm Dwayne Dunham.
And I edited Star Wars, and Dwayne was assistant editor as well. I will tell you one thing about the editing, was I had edited movies for my husband, George Lucas. I had edited American Graffiti. I'd been his assistant on his first movie, THX 1138. And then when we were in London filming Star Wars, I was never designated to be a film editor of the movie. But then he had an English editor that was working with him, and he kept coming home and being very unhappy. And eventually, George had kind of decided that he didn't want to bring the English editor back to the United States, and he asked me if I would edit the movie. And that's how I came to edit Star Wars.
But weren't you
I
working
wanted
with Marty at the time?
No, I mean,
Taxi
well,
driver?
I had done a film for Scorsese, and but yes, I was not the designated original editor, but I'm very happy I did the film.
So I came to Star Wars because my first picture out of film school in San Francisco was One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest in Berkeley, and Richard Chew was one of the editors on that, and I think that's probably how you and George got my name, and I came over and and met George, and that started it all, and it changed everything.
Oh God, it changed a lot.
Yes,
I mean, it changed a lot. George always said to me anyway, that he was making this movie for 10-year-old boys, and 10-year-old boys were gonna love it, and there was gonna be, you know, laser swords and spaceships and everything. And who knew? We certainly didn't know. I will tell you a funny story though. I mean, George, I had been in Los Angeles working with Scorsese, and George was at a studio in Hollywood, and they were doing the European dubs of the movie for the European for foreign language. And we were hungry, and we'd finished our day, and we wanted to get something to eat. So we decided we would go to the Hamburger Hamlet on Hollywood Boulevard because they had made great burgers, and we were leaving the next day to go on vacation. We didn't love to be around during the press junkets. Anyway, long story short, we were sitting in Hamburger Hamlet having our burgers, and across the street was Grauman's Chinese Theater, and in Grauman's Chinese Theater, all these limos were lining up. Well, what's going on over there? And we didn't know. I mean, George didn't know, I didn't know, nobody knew that Star Wars was opening at Grauman's Chinese, and we said, but it's Star Wars.
And look at the line.
Yes, all these people want to go see this film, and all these people in limousines. What are these limousines doing at Star Wars? It was really fun. It was really fun. We had a lot of adventures. We had a lot of good times because, you know, all hell broke loose after the movie. And for us, you know, in our personal lives. And one thing I will say is that in the long term, George was always reluctant to start a family because he wouldn't want it to be financially responsible for starting a family. And so when Star Wars hit and we were all of a sudden financially responsible people, he said, now we can start a family. So we adopted a baby girl, Amanda, who came into our lives, and she has been a joy for both of us for 35 years. Yeah, 35 years.
And Marsha came over on Empire with Amanda in the little stroller and an ice cream cone. And we were in the cutting room.
Yeah, I mean, she's just been a joy to us. Just amazing.
Marsha has always been the family of the Lucasfilm family. Always has been. And when we were doing, I think we were doing Empire, we wanted to do a city here in San Rafael, a softball team.
Oh.
And so Marsha, we recruited Marsha on the team, and you know, George would not do anything like that, but we'd go over to the house afterwards and, you know, have a meal or something and just talk. But I had t-shirts made, and in this building here was Sprockets Systems.
Sprockets, this was Sprockets, yeah.
So I had the t-shirts made, the baseball jerseys, just like Dodger jerseys with the blue and Sprockets written across the front, like Dodger. And the guy delivered it to the cutting room one day. We were over in San Anselmo, and George was over there, I was over here. And the guy brings the box in, he sets it down, and George says, "What's that?" And I said, "It's our softball jerseys." And he says, "Let me see." And I pulled one up, and I hold it up like this. It's sprocket, just like with the Dodger swish, but in the swish, in very, very small letters, the guy who did the t-shirts put, "May the force be with you." And George said, "Oh, that's a real, wait a minute. What's that say? You can't do that. You can't." And it was Marsha who convinced George, "Yes, we can."
It'll be okay.
The radio, TV stations, everybody's not going to be out to watch us play softball and see that it's a Star Wars team.
Yeah. 40 years later, it's hard for me to believe that Star Wars is still alive, it's still vibrant, it's still everything that George wanted it to be and everything that I helped him and supported him to make it be. I got stuck editing the end battle in Star Wars for many months, and we brought in two more wonderful editors. And I always worked in a team, and we had a great team, and we made a great movie.
But if there was anything that was dramatic or emotional, George gave it to Marsha. And Marsha was the last, and George always said, he said, "Always keep one person whose opinion you trust to the very end." And that was always Marsha.
Right.
For me, a screening was, let's have popcorn, let's bring everybody in. But George was like, no, just a few people. And remember Raiders of the Lost Ark?
Yes.
Marsha was the last person to see it. And the movie's over, and we're all patting one another on the back, Stephen and George and Michael Kahn, great editor. And all of a sudden, Marsha says, "Say, fellas, I don't want to rain on your parade, but just one thing." And everybody goes, "What?"
What happened to Marianne?
Yes, he says, "What happened to the girl?" And we go, "Oh my God, we left her tied to the stake."
We left her tied to the stick when all the Nazis get melted
That's
away
right.
and heads explode. And there had been a scene written in the script. There was a scene where they were in San Francisco and they were coming, and he was coming out of a meeting, and she's like, "Let's go get a drink," and they never shot it because they didn't think they needed it. I said, "I don't want to leave Marianne on the stick.
Right.
We need to shoot that." So George went out and George shot the second unit scene.
San Francisco.
Of them coming down.
Yeah.
They shot it at the
City Hall right
City
there.
Hall.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was kind of.
Well,
The movie needed it.
Oh,
It needed
everybody
that little bit of
recognized
closure.
it in that moment. That that's exactly the right note. It needs to be corrected. And working with Marsha and George, Star Wars, changed my life forever. But I think it's important. It's probably a story that's known. But Marsha and George sacrificed a lot. There was a time when Star Wars maybe wasn't even going to get out there. And you put everything on the line to save that thing because you believed in the vision.
Yes.
And oh my goodness, and even contemporaries who came in
But
to see
we
the
were
movie.
very fortunate because it was a 20th Century Fox movie, and Alan Ladd Jr. was the studio executive, and he had faith in the movie. And he believed in the movie, and he came to London and he saw some dailies, and then he saw some rough cuts, and he never ever floundered. So thank you, Laddie.
And I'll never forget the first public screening of Star Wars at the North Point Theater in San Francisco, 8 o'clock on a Saturday morning.
Yeah.
Never seen anything before that. I've never seen anything since that. 4 standing ovations in that movie. When the ship came over in the beginning, remember? And people don't know Star Wars from anything. 8 o'clock in the morning, that ship just keeps coming over for about a week. And then the people standing ovation. And then Han Solo throws the Millennium Falcon in hyperdrive, second standing ovation. And then the trench run, which Marsha always said, it makes no sense. There's no setup, there's no anything. But
If the audience doesn't react when Han Solo flies in the Millennium Falcon, this movie's not going to work.
And it went gangbusters. That was the 3rd standing ovation. And there's no setup or anything, but emotionally, it just worked. And then when it was over, the 4th standing ovation, it's like, what just happened?
Hi, my name's Steve Gawley. I was a model maker on Star Wars. I was model shop foreman on Empire, and I was a model supervisor on Jedi. It's amazing to think that there's still interest in Star Wars, 40 years later. I have to say, doing the first movie was exciting for me because that's my very first film. And we literally started with an empty building. I mean, there was nothing, and everything had to be built, the camera equipment, the offices, model shop, all kinds of things. We didn't have internet or cell phones or video, or, we did it the old-fashioned way, making things with our hands. And Al Miller had to build the computer that controlled the motion control equipment that his dad built and designed. And anyway, I was 23 when I started, and it was just, I was in awe. I think maybe out of the 80 people, maybe 60 were all rookies. We'd never done that before, but anyway, it's just amazing, and so much different talent. Ralph McQuarrie, I love to tell the story of Ralph McQuarrie when he had come and show his paintings for approval from George Lucas, and up until those paintings started, we didn't really know what kind of film we were working on. We were making these spaceships and so forth, and then when Ralph would walk in, it like really energize your interest. Wow, wow, that's kind of cool. And it was pretty neat because occasionally George Lucas he flew down. We were working in Van Nuys at the time, and he would fly down for a couple, 3 days and fly back up here and do editing. And I'd ask him a question like, well, what about this part on the spaceship? What do you think? And he'd say, well, did Ralph draw that? I said, yeah, I think he did. Well, then follow that. So he was very, very inspirational, but it was a fun time, and had no idea that it was going to be that successful. Yeah, it was just remarkable to be involved in it. I consider myself very fortunate.
Hi, I'm Ken Ralston, Supervisor of Visual Effects at Industrial Light and Magic. Couple of thoughts about the good old days, and they were good old days. I have nothing but fond memories of all the fun and the great work that was done here by a very unique group of people. I can remember on putting potatoes in the asteroid field during Empire Strikes Back. I've got tennis shoe flying around and some gum used as spaceships in Jedi. And I think this all comes about just talking about things I was playing around with just to keep me awake during the night crew. And we would put things in the slates is it Empire? Isn't it awful I can't remember some of this stuff, but Empire has the giant worm thing that comes out of the asteroid and grabs the Millennium Falcon. Well, I was shooting the surface detail of that and flying over the top of it. And at the end of the take, I spent a lot of useless time building this hand puppet of a worm that was all ridiculous, screwy cartoon eyes, and had it come up through the crater instead of what it should have come out of the crater. And it was good for dailies. It kind of, I think it epitomizes what the feeling was here and the attitude, which was very loose, yet everyone working very hard, having the freedom to do a lot of different things, experiment, and also just to horse around too. No one was saying, stop that, you're wasting time, or it's not professional. Thank God none of us were professional at the time, because we had a lot of room just to have fun. And I think that's my favorite image of this place, is coming here and just having a great time with all the people and learning a lot. I mean, what a great ground. First of all, a place that gave me the freedom to try a lot of different things. And just feeling that there was no problem with it. If I screwed up, then we wouldn't use it. And really, I made some great friends here that I'm still friends with. just this evening was very, very special. I had no idea so many people from those 3 movies would show up this evening. And it's been great. I'm hoarse from talking to so many of them and just enjoying it. It feels very right, this group. I don't know why. It's like a family. I wish I could say that about other places I've been, but one of the guys that has worked here, I don't think he's here this evening, Tom Santamon, I think put it best when he was saying that we went through the wars together, not just Star Wars, but we all went to battle together and came out the other end a lot closer than a lot of films might make people. So anyway, that's what I know. Thanks.
My name is Don Dow, and I was a camera operator and later on a supervisor of visual effects. I think my most favorite memory was working on Empire and working as a camera operator. And it was just a neat experience to work with such wonderful people. And I'd come to work and work every day and go home at night and not even hardly be aware that I had worked. It was such a great time to work with all the different people that I worked with. And worked on the night crew. And you had to work on the night crew to get a t-shirt. So I actually fit in this t-shirt, which is pretty amazing for having it that long.
My name is Peter Coran, and I worked on the animation rotoscope department on the first Star Wars. I also worked on Empire Strikes Back, and I was a contractor on Return of the Jedi. I was 19 years old. I was working at CalArts. I went to school at CalArts at the time, and I'd heard about this movie being made by the man who made American Graffiti. So I put my reel together to show to John Dykstra. I brought it in. At the time, you're putting together a 16mm reel based with splices and everything in it, and when I ran the film for him, every splice broke. And I'd rethread it up, and then the next splice would break. And by the time I was finished, I wasn't sure what Dykstra was really thinking of me at the time. So I said I would work for a week for free, and if I turned out okay, you could keep me on and pay me, or if you didn't like my work, then you could let me go and you didn't owe me anything. So at that point, they kept me on. They kept me on and paid me, and that's how I started on Star Wars. Also, even though I was working in the roto animation department, I was really skinny, so they put me in the C-3PO suit for a shot for an insert shot, transition shot out in the El Mirage. Even though I lived up in CalArts and El Mirage was really close to CalArts, I was the low man on the totem pole, so I had to go pick up Mark Hamill in Malibu, which was nowhere near where I was, and bring him back. And they sat me down and put me in the speeder, which was an English car, and it had a stick shift. And I got in the car, I was dressed up as C-3PO, and I said I'd never driven a stick before. So they took me out of the car and drove me around for about half an hour to teach me how to drive a stick. And at that point, then I was in the film. I also helped C-3PO go through at Grauman's Chinese Theater. People say, "Oh, gee, was that you in the original documentary?" But that was my initial experience on Star Wars. And after the movie was over, they kept hiring me just because I was skinny enough to fit in the suit. But I was basically rotoscope animation. I think, things that I contributed to the film, like the lasers, I gave them perspective. I thought that, when I was working on it, the perspective didn't look right. I did shadows and reflections. I call them shadows and reflections. I think I was the first person to actually put animated shadows and reflections into shots for a movie, which are now part of, what's expected from people. They brought me up on Empire and hired me as the animations rotoscope supervisor on Empire. And I had to basically put a crew together. Not only did I have to put a crew together, I had to put the department together. So they told me to learn how to cut, put together desks. I had to put my own desks together on Empire up here. And then after that, I got my own company, but they still hired me to do contract work.
Hi, I'm Charlie Bailey. I came here as a model maker in 1979 after a career as a toy designer at Mattel. It was amazing. I was employee number 34 right after Patty Blau. And I was just dumbfounded at what we were doing here. And I found myself, instead of working for a corporation, I was working in a family of great friends. And probably the biggest impact was going to dailies in the morning and seeing what our work looked like on the screen. Nobody ever gets to see that. It was a collaborative art piece. And then, of course, when Empire came out, it was just mind-blowing that, we all worked on this gigantic piece of art that the whole world gets to see. It was better than being in the Louvre. So that was the beginning, and Lauren Peterson had hired me for 3 months, and it turned into 31 years. So it was a great career here, and I just can't imagine a better life. It was wonderful.
I'm Chris Evans. I was a matte artist working at ILM on Jedi. The memory I wanted to share is how I ended up painting an Ewok village shot for the movie. I remember going up, talking to Joe Johnston in the art department. He gave me a storyboard, which I brought back and showed it to Michael Pangrazio, who is our supervisor in the matte department. And he said, I could do this scene in the movie. And start by taking an 8x10 still of the plate, the live action, which was a picture of an Ewok on a vine swinging out into darkness, more or less. And the storyboard told me that there was supposed to be an Ewok village there. So I just improvised. I painted trees and houses and did a rough sketch with acrylic paint on the photograph. Mike said, bring it down and show George and see what he says. So our matte department was up in the top of the back of ILM. I walked down the stairs with my little painting and found George working alone in a trailer in the middle of the parking lot, editing the film. And walked up the stairs and said hi, and I said, this is a shot I'm designing for the Ewok village. And what do you think? And he looked at it a little bit, and he liked the composition, and he said, great, go do it. It was that simple. It took about 2 or 3 minutes, and I went back to the matte department and started doing the painting, which ended up by being on a big sheet of glass. And after a few weeks, it was done and in the movie, and it was a wonderful experience.
My name is Craig Barron, and I worked in the matte painting department for The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. I saw Star Wars and at the North Point Theater, and I just was amazed by it, and I said I have to figure out a way to work at ILM. And I was interested in stop motion at the time, so I had sculpted some puppets, and I seeked out where George Lucas lived. He lives in a Victorian in San Rafael. And not knowing any better, I just took my stop motion puppets and I went over to his house. And fortunately for me, his house was also his offices in his first floor. And I met Patty Blau, who was the secretary there. And she said, no, you don't want to be here, you want to be down at ILM. That's where they make the Star Wars movies. So she called me a cab. And while this was happening, George walked downstairs and Patty said, introduced me to George and said, here's Craig Barron, he wants to go to ILM and meet with them. And George said hello, but was busy, and I think I might have coughed awkwardly, and he left immediately. And so Patty phoned ILM and said, George is sending somebody down, show him around, he wants an interview. And so when I got to ILM, Richard Edlund was there, Jim Bloom, Ralph McQuarrie, Joe Johnson, and me with these little puppets because apparently George had told him to interview me. And of course they figured out I was just a kid, but Richard Edlund kind of said, well, Ralph needs some help in the mount department, and so they hired me. And so that's how I got into ILM. And I told this story to Patty years later when I was working with her, and she completely forgot all about it. So she changed my life that moment. So I'm always grateful for her for that. So that's my Star Wars story.
Hi, my name's Frank Ordaz, and I worked in the matte department during Return of the Jedi. Almost Revenge of the Jedi, but luckily it got changed. I worked on the opening scene, Docking Bay matte painting scenes. I also painted the skin of the Star Wars model. And one of my favorite memories is working on the Death Star. And I worked with initially with Bill George. He and I were painting the skin on the Death Star model. And I thought I would put a little bit of graffiti on the Death Star. So through one of the little slats, I put "Hi Mom" and a couple other words. And George came in one afternoon to review the model because it's a big part of the movie, right? It gets blown up. George kind of looks at it, talks to George, Bill George and myself, and he goes, and by the way, Frank, take out the "Hi Mom" and the other things. I was amazed because the words were so small. It was inconceivable that he could have spotted it, but he did. So that's one of my favorite. And the other part was just the amount of pressure that we had to complete 45 matte paintings. Back during that time, there were literally just 3 of us that were painting these scenes. Everything's digital now. Back in '81, we painted on glass and we painted on masonite. I was just here at just the right time because I love painting, and I'm still a painting artist. So I was able to use my giftings to be part of the Star Wars legacy and have that opportunity. It's truly been a blessing, and even though what I worked on was 30 years ago, I think it still has a lasting impact on the culture. It's inspired those who watch it to want to do something not only like that, but even better than that. It's a springboard for technology and for vision.
Ira Keeler. I started on September 1981 with Neil Rodas in the helmet shop. Worked all winter. In spring, I was asked by Steve Golly to come to the model shop, working with all the great model makers. And Mike Fulmer was my good friend from way back in 1973. We worked together a lot. And so anyhow, I did a lot of model work, and I worked here until I retired in 2002. The speeder bikes, worked with Charlie on the barge, worked with Ezo Young. We did the big pickle ships, they called it. One great story is working with Nilo and Pete, Dick Davis, Chuck Wiley, myself. We were working in the helmet shop and we created Biker Scout. I carved the helmet, a lot of his body parts. We got set up. One morning we're going to have a dog and pony show. George is going to come in. He wants to see the biker complete. Well, we didn't have his holster and the gun, which I had actually designed, or the holster. So, what are we going to do? Well, someone handed me a Makita hand drill, and I got down on my hands and knees with the drill. They gave me the holster. Chuck Wiley handed me a couple of rivets, and I drilled a hole and riveted it on while George was watching. So you got to see it. That's my story.
I'm Jeff Mann, and I came here to ILM in about 1980, and it was a pretty unique place to come to because I'd never been to a place that had so many creative people that did so many things so well. And there was this family feeling. It was a small place, and everything was built to perfection. And everything was built here because you couldn't buy it. I mean, you couldn't go to the hardware store and buy anything. You could buy stuff to make into stuff, but everything was done from scratch. And everybody that was here was sort of handpicked for their role. I came here on Star Wars film that I worked on was Jedi, and I worked on that as a model maker. And I built some creatures and some spaceships, mainly spaceships. There was a lot of various sizes of spaceships, big ones and little ones, pieces of ones, a lot of tunnels, and a lot of moving stuff around and making the scale work and for the different shots, and a lot of interaction with the different parts of the crew. There were, the camera, the grip and electric, and the kind of creative leadership with the art direction. All of that gelled together in a really unique way. And I'd never been to a place like that. It's not like working at a, working on a workbench by yourself. Your cohorts are all smarter and more talented and really supportive. And that was what really sticks with me today. And I was here over 20 years and was able to really be involved in the analog part. And as the company grew, I had an opportunity to grow with it and move through a number of different jobs from analog to digital. It was a real transition in terms of methodology and the way people thought and worked. Today, what's really interesting is being here today. There's so many people that I worked every day with and know every one of their names and all their life stories and all their family and everything. But and the building and the place, it looks so familiar. It's like being home. But now I'm an artist and I work by myself in my own studio, and it's like when I first started doing that about 5 years ago, it's like I had PTSD. It was like, where is everybody? Where's the, who do I turn to? But I learned how to be able to do so many different things, and it was just, it was a life experience that it's priceless.
I'm John Erland. I was a model maker on Star Wars, the first Star Wars. This is Kay.
And I'm Kay Erland.
What did Star Wars do? What did Star Wars do for me? and for all of us who were involved. It transformed life for most of us. It transformed the way films were being made. It transformed the way films were being perceived. It, to a huge extent, rejuvenated a motion picture industry that had been in pretty severe decline in the 70s. And Star Wars suddenly produced a movie that had people lined up around the block, several blocks, multiple blocks, to see a film that had re-envisioned the way we see much of everything, the world, ourselves. It wasn't the greatest film anybody ever made. It is not the greatest film in the world. But it did transform the way films were made and the way films were seen in a way that hadn't happened for a very, very long time.
And it created a huge group of young technical wizards who loved what they were doing and went on to do many, many films and parts of films and formed a family that's still here today.
We're at a 40th anniversary reunion of the folk who made the first Star Wars and the next Star Wars. And as Kay says, it produced a whole generation of people that were going to change, if not the world, at least the world that movies knew.
My name's Kim Marks. I started at ILM in 1981. I interviewed with Richard Edlin and a camera operator, Rick Fichter, and they decided I'd had the job. So I moved from Utah, where I was living at the time, and been making wildlife films and Grizzly Adams and all these crazy low-budget movies in Utah. And the first film I worked on was Poltergeist here, the first Poltergeist. And I was blown away. I thought this was definitely the most interesting part of filmmaking I'd ever done. I was tutored by the best. I worked with, starting with Richard Edlin, and then when Richard left, I worked with Dennis Murin, Mike McAllister, Eric Breivik, Ken Ralston, all of them, and every one of them had the patience and a certain special knowledge about parts of visual effects that it was like going to a university and having all these specialists teach you the different parts of visual effects and miniature photography, high-speed photography, blue screen, stop motion, worked with Phil Tippett in stop motion, totally mind-blowing stuff. Recently I was talking with one of my friends from ILM, and I said, you know, little did I realize these would be the best days of my life as far as filmmaking goes. And it's absolutely true, and I talked with a bunch of people here tonight. Very, very rare occurrence. And I think Phil said tonight, this will never happen again. It's once in a generation or once in 10 generations that you ever get an opportunity to do that. And I feel very, very lucky that I got to work with that. You know, that group of people. And Ed Hirsch, who drugged me through many a difficult setup and many difficult situations and big lighting and perspective. I mean, I had an art education from Ed. Wonderful, wonderful teacher. Working on Jedi was the biggest movie at the time. And I'd gone from shooting wildlife films and animal films in Utah to making this sci-fi giant. Very, very exciting.
Hi, Ned Gorman started on Return of the Jedi in autumn of 1982, and I started as a production buyer, working in the production department. And where to begin? Worked on Jedi for the last 6 months of the show, conducting what would be the world's greatest scavenger hunt. Whatever was needed on stage, in the model shop, in optical, in any department, me and my buddy Paula Karsh found it. And it was the coolest thing in the world. We got to spend about 30 or 40 grand a week of George's money. And we got to spend it on cool stuff. The impact of Jedi, for that matter, the entire trilogy on my life is incalculable. I saw Star Wars Episode 4, before it was called Episode 4, at least 27 times, and even though I'd been having some moderate success in the San Francisco industrial and commercial market, I decided that I had to be involved in that no matter what it took. And I started banging on the door in 1978, and I finally got let in 1982, thanks to my pal Paula Karsh. As far as favorite memories, where do I begin? I think my favorite memory is mostly a global. The moment I would have every day in dailies, not only on Jedi, but on every show, which is how do we take these disparate pieces, take the resources out of the ground, paint, metals? How do engineers and artists take all these pieces, build their pieces, send it into optical, and then in midair on an aerial image printer somehow manage to fuse it together into the rearrangement of silver oxide on a piece of celluloid and come up with brilliance on demand every day? It shouldn't work, but somehow it always did. And we kept doing it and doing it. At the end of the show, one of my jobs was to go over to the film bay. I was in charge of the film inventory, and one day I was over there just counting the cans of 5272 and making sure we had enough stock. And they brought out the reactor chamber model for a Jedi. The penultimate moment in the film where the Falcon flies in and blows up the central core of the reactor and brings it down. As I remember, the model was about 8 feet in diameter, and we'd received an order to break it up, to destroy it. George didn't want it around, if my memory serves. So I was there while the guys took sledgehammers to it and just knocked it apart and threw it in a dumpster. I couldn't resist going over and taking some of the metal etched pieces that had been done on a laser cutter and slipping a few in my pocket. And I still have them, and every time I look at them, it's hard not to become emotional, because it's a teeny molecular part of something that brings joy and magic and hope to people every day they look at that movie.
My name's Tom Smith, and I was the general manager at ILM for about 5 years. Probably the best time of my life in terms of my working profession. It was wonderful. We tried to keep people from knowing what we were doing there, so we had a different name on the door. And one night we were working late, and we ordered about 30 or 40 pizzas to feed everybody. And the guy brought all the pizzas over, and he looked around at what was going on. I said, "What do you guys do here?" Joe Fulmer was down there. He's one of the model guys. He said, "Well, we make, I shouldn't tell you because we're not supposed to tell anybody, but we make and test rectal thermometers." I said, "Really?" "Yes," he said, "they're a special design. They're curved, so you can put them in and you can read them yourself." That's my funny story. Anyway, but it was great working for George Lucas and working on these wonderful films.
Hiya, I'm Sid Ganis, and I was here at LucasFilm for 7 delightful years, from 1979 through 1986. And because I was here for all that time, I knew my way around. Somebody said to me about tonight, "Do you need directions?" I said, "No, of course I know how to get here." Well, I do know how to get here, except for one thing. When I turned right on Kerner off of Francisco, I had no idea that Kerner was a one-way street now. In my day, it was the street I always drove up to get to the office. But people were nice and polite, honked at me politely, and I figured it out finally. George Lucas was a little reticent about being in the public light in those days, in the 80s and in the early 80s especially. He would stay back. He himself was behind the scenes. And often I was in front of the scenes because, among other things, I did the marketing for Lucasfilm, among other things. And I would be the guy out there. And the simple fact is, in those days, we kind of looked alike. Well, sure enough, there was a July 4th party, a July 4th party at the ranch. And there I was, and there was George, and it so happens there was Steven Spielberg. He came to the party that year. And the three of us were talking, standing around talking. And sure enough, two little kids, two boys, came up to us and looked at me and said, "Mr. Lucas, can I have your autograph?" George was standing right next to me. And I said, No, I'm not George. That's George Lucas. And the two little kids looked at the two of us, Stephen standing next to him, and said, "Oh no, you're George Lucas." So I signed the page, George Lucas, and moved on. You know, the question becomes, how was your time at Lucasfilm in terms of your overall career? Well, I would say to you, magical. The answer is magical on so many different levels. Here's the first of them. I met my wife during the time I worked at Lucasfilm. She worked for KQED, the PBS television station here in the Bay Area. And she was assigned to be the producing executive at KQED for a documentary I did with Steve Starkey called The Making of Raiders of the Lost Ark. So sure enough, one day she came out to Lucasfilm. It's a good story there. She came out to Lucasfilm, and there she was, and there I was, and that was the beginning of what is now a 30-something year marriage. Pretty good one. And then beyond that, you know, it was a calling card for me right up to this day, and a great one. So I'm grateful to George, of course, and to the others, to everybody I'm seeing tonight here. This is a joyous, great time.
I'm Marty Brennis, and I had a lot of roles in the Lucas Empire. Originally, I was brought into ILM as a wiring droid, and they needed someone to wire a blue screen, and I came in and wired that up. And I looked there and said, "Hey, you need that thing wired? Yeah, how about that thing?" One thing led to another, and 26 years later, I was still at ILM. It's been a wild ride, riding on the bleeding edge of filmmaking technology, being able to see things get born, and looking around now going, "Hey, I remember when we did that first." And it's just an amazing trip with some amazing people that are all gathered here tonight. I made some very good friends and joined a family, as it were, a tribe that looks after each other and takes care of itself, its members. And it's just been sort of interesting being able to do the latest thing or create stuff that now everybody else is doing. There was a fellow that came and spoke to us once in a while who would talk about the amazing opportunity that you get every once in a while to work with the best people in the business. And he would say, "How often do you get to do that?" And I would look around and I would think, every day. And that's kind of been how it's been. I didn't know what I was getting into when I started, but boy, I'm glad to still be riding that wave.
My name's David Scott. I worked on the very first Star Wars movie. I was hired on as a production assistant and later became a model maker. I stayed with the company. First it was ILM, and then George took it all up north, and I was left with John Dykstra and Grant McCune, and we started a new company. It was called Apogee, and I worked with them for 10 years. I never knew that it would come to be such a big thing in my life when I started. I was just working as a flight instructor, and I was teaching Bob Shepard how to fly, and he was happened to be a production assistant on the film when it was starting up. And he asked me if I wanted to go to work in the model department, and he took me over to a facility that they were building on Valjean Avenue in Van Nuys, and was right near the airport where I was working. And he took me through the shop. I saw them working on X-wing fighters and building sets. And he asked me, he said, "Can you do that?" I said, "Well, I don't know if I can do it or not. I don't want to commit. I'm very non-committal about things, and I didn't want to disappoint them. But I'm certainly glad that I stayed with it, because later I got in the union and I had a whole career, and then after 10 years we did Caddyshack, we did a lot of films. I left. I just wanted to paint, and so I quit. I wanted to become a painter, and that's what I did. And I'm a working artist. I teach in a college now a little bit, and I've had shows in museums, and my life has completely turned around. But that was a great episode in my life. I'm forever grateful for it. Star Wars was a turning point in my life. Actually, it was like one of the best things that ever happened to me. I made so many beautiful friends. Some of them have passed away, but mainly the ones that are here still are I've been in touch with, and it's very very gratifying to have that kind of an experience with people.
Corey McCrum, and I was in the film control department, which would have now, because we were making things up as we went along, would have been basically a visual effects coordinator at that point. And my supervisor would have been one of the visual effects producers. It was one of the most extraordinary experiences I've ever had. Watching Harrison Ellenshaw late at night do glass paintings was one of the biggest blessings I've ever had. I'd never seen anybody work like that. And then to see it shot and come out on film, it just was extraordinary. I got to, the guys let me do a lot. They let me hot splice the VistaVision. They taught me how to thread a printer in the optical department. They just let me just learn anything I wanted to learn. And I think that was one of the biggest blessings I had ever had in my life. I had never been on a movie. I had always loved movies, but it was sort of like an answer to a prayer. And it set me on this incredible path. And I've been in the film business now for over 40 years. I've been on staff. I've freelanced as a post-producer. I've been a senior VP. I've had an extraordinary career out of just this one movie.
Hi, my name is Bruce Logan. I worked on the first Star Wars, now called The New Hope. which I'm not sure where that came from. I had my own little splinter visual effects unit that was created because George came back from London and not a frame of visual effects footage had been shot at the time. So he had this harebrained idea that he was going to have puppeteers and he was going to put spaceships on long rods and he was going to fly them through the frame. And so of course that didn't work, but my little unit then became a pyrotechnic unit. And we started off with very small explosions, because there were going to be a lot of explosions in the movie. And we started off on this little tiny stage with Joe Viscoso in a little changing room, which was normally used for changing or putting film into magazines. And the first morning there was a big bang from inside this room. Joe came out and all the hair on his arms was all gone, but he made these wonderful bombs for us that he hung from the ceiling, and we shot directly up at the explosions, which gave them the effect of them being in outer space. Because obviously if you let an explosion off normally and you shoot it, it just looks like a little mushroom cloud. So what we found out was that there was no substitute, with all miniatures, there's no substitute for scale. So the explosions got bigger, the stage got bigger. We ended up on producer's studio, and we were shooting into a 40 by 40 blue screen and shooting VistaVision, 90 frames a second, and the bombs got bigger and bigger, and we would be running around the stage, and I'd be wiping burning napalm off my arms, I remember at one time. And somehow this whole experience changed my life, and now I'm the guy that blew up the Death Star. So there you go.
My name is Scott Farrar. I was a visual effects cameraman on Jedi. What I remember was after Dennis had told me that he'd like me to stay on and work on the movie, and I wanted to shoot plates. And he said, yeah, you can shoot in Crescent City and the Redwoods, and we'll shoot in the desert, and you'll work with Richard Edlund on that. And I said, that's fantastic. So my assistant, Bob Hill, and I wanted to see, what is this movie all about? Because we didn't have much of a script. So we snuck into, over here in D Screening Theater, we snuck in the back door. They were running some dailies that had come back from England, and we might get a sneak peek at what the movie was all about. So we came in and we were looking, and it was all black and white footage. And the image on the screen was a bunch of little teddy bear actors in suits jumping around on these fake logs in this kind of a forest scene. And we thought, my God, what are we getting into? We came out of that, we thought, are we going to work on the only dud of the three? What is going on with this movie? So we were not quite sure what we were getting into at that point. But cut to, we got into it, and it was such a romp. And we worked very close with George and Marsha. I remember especially up in Crescent City, working in the forest. And Marsha was incredible as far as figuring out exactly what shots were missing. They had a plan, of course, but she was laser beam sharp about, okay, we have all these shots. You guys need to go out and shoot this. You got to have this 2-shot and this over and this back shot, and then they got the flip, and then do this stunt, and then we got it. And George would say, all right. And every day, it was like animal ball out there. And we would get these shots, just anybody that had a camera, and I was one of them, and there were about 4 of us, just go get some Ewoks and go shoot stuff. And we shot all these little vignettes and movies and setups, and a lot of that's in the movie. Right at the end, I was on, again, visual effects, I was effects camera, which means after you go shoot plates, live action, you come back. And here on the stage, I was on a motion control D-Flex camera. I think McAllister was on the other camera. And you'd work
4 months day crew, 7 to 7. And then you went to night shift, and you went 3 months night shift. So it was like, you cannot believe. We shot so many elements every day, ships and, you know, lots of spaceships and lots of motion control and joystick for everything. Light it, shoot it, set it up, get it in the RAR, look at the shots, figure it out, change it, edit it, you know, put it together, show it to Joe, show it to George, move on. Well, at the end, I ended up on night shift and literally shooting so hard, and it was Akbar's ship at that point that I had. And I was shooting all these shots where all the A-wings are coming down and everything's fighting, and you got to shoot the foreground elements, the background elements. Literally, they're stopping the whole show at that point, and it's like the last few shots. And Rose Degnan comes in to get me and Bob, and I think Dickie Dova was helping us light, and literally pull us off the models and the camera and says, okay, guys, stop. We're done with the movie. It's a wrap. We're having a party in here. You guys can quit shooting and you can join us now. And so we did. But my God, the momentum of the whole thing was, you were so geared to shoot this stuff and make it as good as you could that it was really hard to let go.
My name is Randall Dutra. I was, I think, credited as creature technician and ended up doing some key sculpting on Jedi. Jedi was my first movie. I came to Jedi in September of 1981 and met some of the people that now I'm seeing for been a long time. Joe, Ken, John, Mr. Berg, Phil, Dennis. So it brings back a lot of memories. And I'd say one of my fondest memories is being on location on Jabba's barge, the exterior at Yuma, Arizona. And also when Phil called me in to sculpt Rancor from his design, from his maquette, his beautiful little maquette, and I sculpted the eventual hand puppet that was in the film. So that was a highlight for me and very generous of Phil. And there's people here that have enriched and enlarged my life. And probably changed it in a lot of ways when I look back in different directions your life can take. And they're still hard and fast friends, and I couldn't have been with a better group of guys and gals.
My name is Randy Ottenberg. I was in the model shop. I got hired in 1981. Previous to Jedi, we worked on, what did we work on? E.T. and Poltergeist. But when we started on Jedi, I think my favorite moment was when we all got to take the day off and head to Muir Woods with Dennis for research so we can study the redwood bark for the speeder chase scene. And then we came back and made models of the redwood trees. But we got to walk around the redwoods in an afternoon, so that was fun. And how did it affect my life? I was a fine artist before, I'm a fine artist now, and I got to have a job for 30 years in between, so.
Yeah, I'm Warren Franklin. I started at ILM on The Empire Strikes Back in March of 1978 as a technical assistant. I didn't really know a lot about special effects, but I learned pretty quickly, and I'd say that having an opportunity to work on the second of the Star Wars films still is the most exciting film I've ever worked on, and I've worked on probably another 30 or 40 films since then. It was a great camaraderie in the studio, from everything crashing into Dagobah, where all people were called on stage to help, throw twigs and stuff in front of the X-Wing, to when we were upstairs before the building commissioner came to get a permit. We had Joe Johnston and Neil Rodas in the art department, aging down all the rooms so it looked like it had already been built. So it was an exciting time, and I don't think it'll be duplicated. It was a small crew, and all sort of had the same passion that George and Marsha had for making the movie, and it was just incredible.
Hi, I'm Patrick Sweeney. During the Jedi production, I was a camera assistant. The show was so intense and so busy that they realized they could not get it done during the day. So they started a night crew, and I ended up working for 6 months at night, and our crew time would start at 6 p.m. and we would get done about 2, 3, 4 in the morning, sometimes later. But the schedule was so intense that every once in a while we thought, hey, let's brighten up our rushes, our dailies. And so we were shooting the Millennium Falcon, and we had 2 scale models of this, and one of them was small, just probably 2 feet long, and then of course the other one was about 5 feet long. So we decided, oh, this will be funny. We'll take this small Millennium Falcon that we're shooting for this one shot, and we'll take the radar dish, very famous, that's stuck above the bigger model, and we'll stick that on the smaller model. And it will be so funny because it'll just be so far out of scale that everyone in the screening room, it'll just give them a break, because dailies were an hour long, and it's, man, you'd go through the dailies and then you'd hit the stages and work as hard as you could. And so our shot comes up, Millennium Falcon flies by, and there's this big radar dish on this little ship, and complete silence in the screening room. Nobody thought it was funny, or they were asleep. I just don't know. But basically, it was like, probably quit wasting film and just get the shots, because we got so many to do. I remember my longest day here at ILM. We started the shot, and we were working on the speeder bike sequence. And there was a shot where the speeder bike gets caught and he wraps himself around a tree. And we started on the motion control stages, which were only about 15 feet wide. And we realized it's like, God, we don't have enough room to do this properly. So Mike McAllister, our operator DP, said, let's go over to the main stage, and this is in the evening, and we'll set it up over there. We've got a bigger blue screen over there. We can do the shot there. And the problem was, of course, that everybody was gone. And so we had one gaffer grip, Dickie Dova, and we're like, how are we going to do this, Mike? We have no help. Oh, come on, we'll figure it out. So we go over there. We're setting it up. Dickie and I are hanging lights in the grid, which is 30 feet up in the air. And we're crawling around and doing this stuff. And we worked as hard as we could all night long from 6 o'clock until 6 o'clock. The next crew came in at like 7 or 8 a.m. and they were ready to do their part. And we're like, we're not finished with this shot. And we would never have gotten the shot without the combination of our crew and the day crew. And this shot was so wide that it involved us taking this 40-foot long blue screen and trucking it along during the shot. So we had all these guys pulling this thing with like a forklift, and we're shooting this thing as this thing's winding around, the blue screen's moving back and forth on the stage. And we finally got done at 11 a.m. the next morning. And I thought, whew, this is a tough show, but it all paid off.
Hello, my name is Pete Ronzani. I worked on Return of the Jedi. I was hired by Neil Rodas to help implement the costume design, mostly the plastic armaments and helmets. As I said, I was hired by Neil Rodas. He was a former student of mine at San Jose State University. He came to me one time, said, hey, I'm trying to do the costume design for the next movie. And he showed me some sketches, and I gave just a lot of encouragement. I said, just go do it. He wanted to bring the costume design to ILM and out of the London studios. About a couple months after that, something like that, I got a call from Nilo. He said, "Help!" And I thought, what do you mean? He says, "George Lucas liked what I did. He wants to implement it. Can you help?" I said, "Sure." Because he said, I don't know how to do it. Well, I didn't know how to do it either, but I'm trained to figure things out. So I put the team together, and what I like to do is just give you a good case study of one particular helmet, and that would be the Imperial Guard helmet. I picked that one because it was unusual. Nilo really took cues off of John Malo's design, the look of Star Wars, and this one was a departure. It was unusual. I worked from his storyboards, and I got Jim Howard to do the sculpting. He was all set up, so he took the design off of paper, started cleaning the thing up, and the idea was to make the helmet very long and jowly and very slender. That's what George Lucas wanted, and Nilo was sketching it up, and we sculpted it, and George would come through the studio, maybe once a week, and he looked at the original clay, and he looked at it, and he said, well, it should be longer. The actors are going to be real tall, so the helmet should be just longer. It looks too squatty. And maybe a week later, George came through, and he's a person who knew what he wanted. He remembered what he said, and he looked at it. He said, yeah, that's in the right direction, but take more out of here. And he said the eyes are very important. We just want a little slit there. We had indicated a bigger slit. So it's back to sculpting, and we started shaving more off the clay. And all along we had calipers, and I have the biggest head, probably in the world. So if it's going to fit me, it'll fit the tall actors. So I had the calipers, and we would caliper this and this and this, and go up to the clay and do this and this and this. And Nilo said, oh, it's got to be slimmer. So, so we shaved more off, and I thought, this thing is never going to fit. Anyhow, it was complete. George came through, gave it the okay. I had an outside consultant do the mold. We got it back. He knew it had to be in two halves because we'd form a right half and a left half. But we had to saw the thing in half. We thought that wouldn't be too bad. But what the mold maker did, he put a 2x4 right down the center. So we got the regular old handsaw. I remember what those look like, the carpenters used, and we sawed that thing for light years. Anyhow, we got the pieces formed. People were around. Some of the costume ladies at the far end of the shop came over because this was going to be the first time that it would be put on a head, namely my head. So there should have been a drummer there with a drum roll. We vacuum formed the two pieces. I trimmed them out. I took gaffer's tape, taped it together, cut out the little slit, and I was nervous. I took the helmet, put it over my head, started wiggling it down. I thought, oh. And I pulled a little harder, and there was some relief. My head was in position. It fit me. I could see out of it through the slits. I took it off, and it was cause for celebration. So I kept a little bottle of Rebel Yell behind the cabinet. Yeah, I'd like to describe a little bit in more detail about the group. There were 6 people, including myself and Nilo. We had no film experience. We never worked on costume. And we produced, you saw the results. We did it in about 3.5 months, and I think we produced there many duplicates. I think it was close to 75 helmets. I have similar stories to tell about the other helmets. The biker helmet would be, You know, same kind of story, the problems, some of the fun, some of the frustrations, the Princess Leia disguise helmet, the Billy D. Williams disguise helmet. And all along, Nilo was really keen off of what John Mallow did. It had to have that Star Wars look. With the biker helmet, that was intended to be sort of a slimmed down, modernized version of the Stormtrooper helmet that had a very, very flat top on it. The biker scout helmet was sort of flat on top. Nilo wanted it real flat to make it a bit more distinctive. I think part of the success is that it was just great working for a company that had such a good corporate culture. It was all teamwork. We all could put our 2 cents into it. It wasn't really a committee design, but we all had some say in it. And I think that really contributed to the success.
Neil Krupla, Matt Department cameraman on Empire Strikes Back, and Matt Department camera supervisor on Jedi. We had to go out to Death Valley with George and a number of people to get some pickup shots, and some of these were for matte painting shots. And one of the shots was going to be R2-D2 and C-3PO walking up this valley towards Jabba the Hutt's palace, which was up on the right-hand side. And we knew it was an important shot, and we knew that it was going to, at the time, was going to have one of George's favorite wipes across it. So those wipes were done out of house by another vendor than ILM, and we're always worried about the degradation of the shot and getting ruined. So we decided to do it as a latent image or a whole take. And what this entailed is that you go out with a camera, you set up your shot, and you block off part of the screen. That is, using the matte box or a piece of glass in front, you block off the area where the matte painting is going to go. And you basically shoot about 100 feet of test, and you do a little, open up the camera, you do a little punch mark, and then you do a take with about 20, 30 feet of hold on the beginning, and then you run your action. And you try and get 3 takes, and each one's got a little bit of test footage at the beginning. And the thing that makes it different is you don't take it to the laboratory. It's held in the camera. You basically take it back to the studio, which we did, to the matte department, and in the darkroom, you rewind that footage back to its original beginning. And you clip off a little bit of that 100 foot of test footage, process that. It's like 3 feet. And you use that to project out through the camera onto a piece of glass or board, whatever you're going to do for your painting, and line up your shot. And then the painter paints in where that black area is, and using that original footage that you shot on location, you do a second exposure. This time you blocked out all the area where that live action was, and you're only photographing the painting. And through a number of tests where the painter is refining the shot, you get this perfect blend. And so it's all original negative. It's not been duped, not run through a printer, nothing. And so it's like a first generation. And we did this in VistaVision even to make sure it was even better, because we wanted to supply an element to optical so we could do that wipe in-house. Well, we talked to George about this, and George, when he didn't like something, he wouldn't say anything to you. So we told him what he was going to do, and he goes, kind of walks away. So we had a number of weeks before we was going to go off to the location, and so every chance I got, we'd kind of pitch this. This is going to be so great. It's going to be so beautiful. It's going to be such a wonderful, pristine image. Yeah. And He never really said yes, but he never said no. So this went on for weeks, and finally we got out to location. It was a sunset shot, magic hour. They were doing a few second unit shots, and then we raced ahead with the matte department. We set up the shot, swept it, got R2-D2 being able to run in on this piece of rock that they had to work on, get all the pebbles off. And all of a sudden, the whole unit shows up. George shows up, the director shows up, and we got the shot lined up, we're showing it to him, and we had a second camera to just shoot footage so that they could cut with it, a 35mm setting next to the VistaVision. And I'm explaining, here it is, George, it's like we talked about, and he goes, I don't like this latent image. I don't like this whole take idea. And I just kind of sag. The sun is setting, we're about ready to run out of light, and so the first AD is going, what's going on? What's going on? And so I just basically kind of took George aside and I just started rambling, just chattering at him like, this is going to be so good. We have the second camera, you can cut with it. We can always dupe the stuff later. We can do it second generation. We can do a front projection. We can do a rear projection with it. It's going to be great. Yab, 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 yab. And I'm going like this. And the first AD, he picks it up and he started running the shot. Okay, go, and roll the camera. And they just started doing it. And we just started shooting it. And I'm over there just keeping George occupied. And we got our 3 takes. Everything went fine. And shot came out great. It became one of the iconic shots. You see it printed all the time. It's one of the most beautiful shots in the film. But it was a real chore getting it through and getting it done. And looking back on it was pretty funny. So.
My name is Is Aoyong. I was a model maker on Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. You know, there's so many memories, I can't pick and choose which one, but the thing that has stuck in my mind all these years, even till now, was every morning when I get up, I couldn't wait to go to work. And when I was at work, I could not believe I was doing this. I just couldn't believe, every day I was so happy to be working, to be doing the things that I was doing, building spaceships, making molds, gluing things, cutting pieces together, and then at the end of the day or the next morning, you see the result of your work, and it just blew my mind. Working with all these people, amazing talent, and that's what stuck on my mind, the joy that I had every morning. I just couldn't wait to get up to go to work. Working with these people, it has taught me a lot about being a professional. It was a very loose group. We joked around a lot. We played a lot. We sort of, we just harass each other a lot in those days. We clown each other a lot. But when it came down to working and getting things done, that's what I learned. Like, you find a way to get something done, you solve a problem, and you deal with people in a very professional manner. That's what I learned a lot, and I carry that today to my work. How you deal with people, how you treat them with respect. And yeah, till today, that's what I learned.
Hi, I'm Harrison Ellenshaw, and I'm really pleased to be here because I was fortunate enough to work on Star Wars and Empire Strikes Back. And I'm talking about the original Star Wars. It wasn't titled Episode 4, and at that point, nobody had any idea what the film would be, that it would be such an incredible impact on not only the film business, but the world, and change culture and change our way of looking at movies. And to think that 40 years later, there is somebody, there are many people perhaps now working on the next film, visual medium that might strike into the hearts and minds of people globally. It was a wonderful experience. It was really hard work, but that's no surprise. And for some reason, it all worked out really well. I was very blessed to work on Empire Strikes Back, which was amazing in its own right, because we had to prove that the first one wasn't a fluke. And I think credit goes to Gary Kurtz, George Lucas, and so many others who impacted us. And we worked very hard, and I'm happy that I'm still here 40 years later to have experienced that.
Joe Johnston, and what I did in the movie, well, on Star Wars, I guess I was the art department, and on Empire and Jedi, I was sort of the art director, designer type. I guess the thing I'm going to say, the crazy mishap, was we were always up all night on trying to finish the models and the Death Star and all that stuff. And I remember once I tripped and fell into the trench on the Death Star, the gigantic 80-foot, whatever it was, model. And I tripped and I fell, I hit my head, and I landed in the trench. And it was like 3 in the morning, and I was knocked semi-unconscious. And I thought, and I sort of was woozy, I came to, and I got my jacket, and I went back, and I laid down in the trench. And I spent the night in the trench, in the Death Star trench, on a nice flat piece of the thing. I think I'm the only person that ever slept in the Death Star trench. I'm not sure about that, because a lot of stuff happened after that. And the only other thing I can think of is I fell asleep once in the Starfield, which was a gigantic, this chamber thing where you could, had lights in it, and it had, you poked holes in the paint. I fell asleep in there, taking a nap in the middle of the day, and then somebody, probably Richard Edlund, came on and turned on the Starfield, and it suddenly became, 200 degrees inside that thing. And it was like being inside a toaster oven. I woke up, of course, and screamed. George put me through film school after 10 years working for George in this visual effects, and that has changed my life more than anything. Thanks, George.